The UES horizon drifted through space toward Nexus Station like a small metal fish approaching a massive whale. Captain Ryan Brooks stood on the bridge, watching the alien structure grow larger on the view screen. The station was huge, bigger than any city on Earth, with twisted spires and glowing ports that looked like something from a fever dream. "First contact protocol in effect," announced Navigator Kate Williams from her station. Her voice was calm, but Ryan could hear the excitement underneath. After 300 years of wondering if humans were alone in the universe, they finally had their answer. Not only were they not alone, but they had been invited to join something called the Galactic Empire. Ambassador Lisa Carter adjusted her diplomatic uniform one final time. She had spent months preparing for this moment, learning what little they knew about galactic politics and trade. The invitation had come as a surprise. Earth had just developed faster-than-light travel when a sleek alien ship appeared in orbit. The pilot, a being that looked like a cross between a lizard and a bird, had delivered a formal invitation to join the Empire. "Docking in 10 minutes, called out Chief Engineer Sam Johnson from the engine room through the comm system. "All systems green. We're ready for whatever they throw at us." The whatever turned out to be a bored alien clerk. Administrative Coordinator Vextai met them at the airlock. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and forearms that moved independently of each other. His office was a cluttered mess of data pads, half-eaten meals, and what looked like coffee stains on every surface. When Lisa introduced herself as Earth's ambassador, Vextai barely looked up from his desk. "New species integration," he said in perfect English, though his accent made every word sound tired. "Standard procedure. Fill out these forms." Two of his hands pushed a stack of data pads across the desk while the other two continued typing on different computers. Lisa looked at the stack. There had to be hundreds of forms. "Is there perhaps a welcome ceremony? Or a meeting with your supervisor?" Vextai's four eyes blinked in sequence. "Ceremony costs extra. Supervisor is busy until next month. Forms first. Pay processing fees. Get temporary permits. Then maybe ceremony." Dr. Maria Rodriguez, the mission xenobiologist, picked up one of the data pads. "These are very detailed," she said, scrolling through pages of questions about human biology, technology, and social structure. "How long do new species usually take to complete these?" 3 to 6 months, Vextai replied without looking up.
"Most species negotiate."
"Try to skip sections. Argue about fees. Humans seem different, though. You actually read instructions." Communications Officer Peter Davis was already organizing the forms into categories. "These are about our technology. These about our government. These about our military capabilities." He looked up at Vextai. "The instructions say we need to provide accurate information. What happens if other species lie on these forms?" Vextai's typing stopped. All four eyes focused on Peter. "Lie? Why would they lie? Forms are just formality. Nobody checks answers anyway. Then why have forms?" asked Sam Johnson, who had joined them in the office. The question seemed to break something in Vextai's brain. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. They are procedure. Always had forms. Empire runs on forms." Lisa sat down and began reading through the first data pad carefully. "This section asks about our waste disposal methods. Should I put down our actual procedures or what you think we should have?" "Actual procedures?" Vextai's voice climbed higher. "Nobody puts actual procedures. You put what makes you look good, what makes processing easier." "But the form says to be accurate and truthful," Kate pointed out, reading over Lisa's shoulder. "Forms say many things. Nobody follows forms exactly." Maria had found a section about biological hazards. This Regulation 445B about biological waste disposal. It says we need special containers and regular inspections. Where do we get the containers? Vextai waved one hand dismissively. Regulation flexible. Very expensive to follow exactly. Most species make arrangement. Pay small fee. Skip paperwork. We would prefer to follow the regulation properly, Maria said firmly. Could you direct us to whoever handles the containers? For the first time since they arrived, Vextai stopped all four hands and stared at Maria. You want to follow regulation? Exactly as written? Yes. Even though expensive? Yes. Even though unnecessary? If it's unnecessary, why is it a regulation? Vextai made a sound like air leaking from a tire. He pressed a button on his desk with one hand while frantically searching through desk drawers with the other three. Supervisor, he said into the intercom. Need help with new species. They want to follow regulations. A voice crackled back through the speaker. What kind of bribe are they offering? No bribe. They just want to follow rules. The silence stretched for a long moment. Are they insane? I don't think so. They seem very polite. While Vexthai dealt with his supervisor, the humans continued working through the forms. Peter had set up a system where he read questions aloud, and team members provided answers based on their expertise. Sam handled all technical questions about their ship and equipment. Maria covered biological and medical information. Kate provided navigation and stellar cartography data. Lisa handled political and diplomatic questions. They worked steadily for hours. Vexthai watched them with growing amazement. These humans didn't argue about difficult questions. They didn't try to negotiate easier requirements. When they didn't know an answer, they said so and promised to find out. When a form asked for documentation they didn't have, they made notes about what they needed to provide later. Section 47 asks about military capabilities, Lisa said. Should we include our defensive systems or just offensive weapons? Most species exaggerate military strength, Vexthai said automatically. Make themselves sound dangerous. But we're not trying to sound dangerous. We're trying to be accurate. Why? Lisa looked up from the datapad. Because you asked for accurate information. If you wanted exaggerated information, the form would say so. By the end of the first day, the humans had completed more integration paperwork than most species managed in their first month. They had asked intelligent questions, provided complete answers, and followed every instruction exactly as written. They had also requested additional forms for procedures that applied to their specific situation. Vexthai sat in his cluttered office after the humans left, staring at the completed datapads. In 15 years of processing new species applications, he had never seen anything like it. Most species treated the integration process like a negotiation or a game. They lied, cheated, bribed, and complained their way through the requirements. These humans treated it like it mattered. Senior Administrator Kethvar arrived the next morning to investigate reports of unusual activity. He found Vexthai organizing his office for the first time in years. I heard the new species completed 47 forms yesterday, Kethvar said. 49. Vexthai corrected. They asked for extra forms, said they wanted to make sure they didn't miss anything important. Kethvar's tentacles writhed in confusion. What kind of artificial intelligence are they using? No artificial intelligence. They just read the forms and answered the questions. Impossible. No organic species is that efficient at bureaucracy. Vexthai held up one of the completed datapads. See for yourself. Every answer complete. Every signature in the right place. Every supporting document properly referenced. Kethvar reviewed the forms with growing disbelief. These weren't just complete. They were correct. After decades of processing applications filled with lies, half-truths, and creative interpretations, he was looking at forms that contained actual facts. What do they want? Kethvar asked suspiciously. Nothing. They just want to join the Empire properly. Everyone wants something.
What's their angle?
Vexthai thought about his conversations with the humans. They had been polite, professional, and genuinely interested in following procedures correctly. They hadn't asked for special treatment or tried to skip requirements. They had simply done exactly what the forms requested. I think, Vexthai said slowly, they actually believe the forms matter. 3 months after the humans finished their paperwork, Captain Alex Turner steered his cargo ship toward Trade Station Gamma 7. The massive structure hung in space like a metal flower, its docking arms reaching out to embrace incoming vessels. Alex had been trading between Earth and the outer colonies for years, but this was his first run into alien space. Docking Bay 12 is assigned. His co-pilot Jenny Martinez called from the navigation station. They're charging us standard fees plus processing costs, handling charges, inspection fees, and something called convenience tax. Alex shook his head. Highway robbery, but we expected that. Let's see what passes for business out here. Trade Station Gamma 7 was controlled by the Kelhari Consortium, a group of insect-like aliens who had dominated freight handling in this sector for centuries. Station manager Kliktar met Alex at the cargo bay with an attitude that suggested he was doing humans a huge favor by allowing them to trade at all. Human cargo vessel, Kliktar buzzed through his translation device. First time trading with civilized species. You learn fast how business works in real galaxy. Alex looked at the manifest Clicktar handed him. According to the document, 15% of his cargo was listed as damaged, 10% as missing, and another 12% as substandard quality. This was before anyone had even looked at the actual goods. There must be some mistake, Alex said politely. We haven't unloaded anything yet. Clicktar's compound eyes glittered with amusement. No mistake. Standard loss rates. Very normal. You accept compensation for damaged goods. We dispose of damaged items. Everyone happy. But the goods aren't actually damaged. Inspection will show damage. Always shows damage. Very thorough inspection process. Alex walked over to his cargo containers and opened one at random. Inside were medical supplies from Earth, each item carefully packaged and labeled. He pulled out a container of antibiotics and showed it to Clicktar. This isn't damaged. Not damaged yet, Clicktar agreed. But will be damaged after inspection. Inspection, very rough process. Things get broken. What if we skip the inspection? Cannot skip inspection. Regulations require inspection. Then what if we do the inspection ourselves? Clicktar's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. Impossible. Only licensed station personnel can conduct inspections. Alex studied the alien for a moment. Are there written standards for what constitutes damage? Of course. Very detailed standards. Could I see them? Clicktar's clicking stopped. See standards? Why? So I know what to expect during the inspection. The concept of actually reading the inspection standards seemed to confuse Clicktar. After some discussion with his staff, he produced a datapad containing the official quality control procedures. Alex read through them carefully while Clicktar watched with growing nervousness. According to these standards, Alex said, damaged goods are defined as items that cannot perform their intended function. Medical supplies that haven't expired and are properly sealed should pass inspection. Standards are guidelines, Clicktar said uncomfortably. The document says they're mandatory requirements. Yes, but traditionally, I don't care about tradition. Let's follow the written standards. What followed was the most thorough cargo inspection in the station's history. Alex and his crew checked every item against the written standards. They documented everything with photographs and detailed notes. When Clicktar's inspectors tried to claim that minor scuff marks on packaging constituted damage, Alex politely pointed to the standards that specified damage had to affect functionality. By the end of the day, 98.7% of Alex's cargo passed inspection. The remaining 1.3% had actual problems that Alex's crew fixed on the spot. Clicktar stared at the final inspection report like it was written in a language he couldn't understand. This never happens, he muttered. Always have 20% damage minimum. Maybe your inspection process needs improvement, Alex suggested helpfully. Word of the human cargo inspection spread through the station faster than a hull breach. Other traders began asking questions. If the humans could get their cargo through with almost no losses, why were other species accepting 20% damage as normal? The next ship to dock was a Zentarian freighter carrying luxury goods. Captain Velmos had been trading through Gamma 7 for decades and had always accepted the standard loss rates. But after hearing about the human inspection, he demanded to see the written standards too. You want to read standards? Clicktar asked in disbelief. If humans can read them, so can I. Within a week, cargo losses at Trade Station Gamma 7 dropped from an average of 20% to less than 5%. Traders throughout the sector began demanding inspections that followed written standards instead of traditional practices. The Kelhari Consortium's profits from damaged goods disappeared almost overnight. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, Commander Sarah Mitchell was having her own impact on galactic traditions. She commanded a human squadron participating in joint military exercises with the Feltar Defense Force. The war games were supposed to test coordination between different species fleets. General Tekamor of the Veltar had explained the exercise format. 2 fleets would maneuver against each other for 3 days. Then both sides would claim victory and celebrate their successful cooperation. It was a tradition dating back centuries. Wait, Sarah said during the pre-exercise briefing. Both sides claim victory? How does that work? Very simple, Tekamor explained. Each side writes reports showing how they would have won if exercise was real combat. Both reports get filed. Both commanders get promoted. Very efficient system. But someone actually wins the exercise, right? The side that achieves their objectives first? Thekmore's ears twitched nervously. Objectives are flexible. Victory is matter of interpretation. Sarah looked at the exercise parameters. Each side was supposed to capture and hold 3 strategic positions while protecting their own base. The rules were clearly written. Victory conditions were specifically defined. There was nothing flexible about it. What if we just follow the written rules? She asked. Rules are guidelines. Traditional way is much simpler. But if we're training for real combat, shouldn't we practice actual tactics? The question seemed to short-circuit something in Thekmore's brain. The idea of treating military exercises like actual military exercises was revolutionary. The war games began at dawn on the first day. Sarah's squadron moved according to established tactical doctrine, using the terrain and their ship's capabilities to maximum advantage. They captured their first objective within 2 hours and immediately began fortifying their position. Thekmore's forces, expecting the usual leisurely maneuvering that characterized traditional exercises, found themselves under coordinated attack before they finished their morning meal. By noon, the humans had captured all 3 objectives and were advancing on the Veltar base. This is highly irregular, Thekmore protested over the communication channel. Exercise is supposed to last 3 days. The victory conditions have been met, Sarah replied. According to the rules, the exercise is over. But we haven't had time to develop our counter-strategy. In real combat, the enemy doesn't wait for you to develop counter-strategies. Thekmore called for a pause while he consulted with his superiors. The pause stretched into an emergency conference call involving 3 different star systems. Nobody could remember an exercise ending with a clear victor, especially not in less than 1 day. Sarah spent the break conducting what she called an after-action review with both human and Veltar officers. She analyzed what had gone right, what had gone wrong, and how both sides could improve their performance. She pointed out tactical mistakes and suggested better approaches for future engagements. The Veltar officers listened in fascination. Nobody had ever volunteered to admit their mistakes before, let alone document them for others to learn from. You are saying we made errors? Asked Subcommander Rekval. Everyone makes errors, Sarah said. The important thing is learning from them. But admitting errors shows weakness. No, repeating errors shows weakness. Admitting them shows intelligence. The concept was so foreign that several Veltar officers requested copies of Sarah's analysis to study further. Within months, military units throughout the sector were requesting human advisors to conduct after-action reviews of their exercises. The changes weren't limited to trade and military operations. Dr. Chris Lee, working with the Imperial Science Academy, had introduced research practices that were causing similar disruptions in academic circles. Chris had been assigned to study agricultural enhancement techniques for the Outer Rim colonies. The Academy's traditional approach involved conducting preliminary studies, requesting additional funding for expanded research, conducting expanded studies, requesting more funding for comprehensive analysis, and eventually producing reports that recommended further study. Chris simply conducted the research and published his results. His paper on soil enhancement using earth techniques was complete, detailed and immediately applicable. It included raw data, methodology, statistical analysis, and step-by-step implementation instructions. Colony administrators could read the paper and immediately begin improving their agricultural output. Academy Director Sothvar was appalled. This research is too complete. Dr. Jennifer Walsh arrived at the Central Banking Authority building on Nexus Prime with a simple assignment: conduct a routine audit of transaction processing systems. As a systems analyst from Earth, she had expected to find the usual inefficiencies that plagued large organizations. What she found instead changed her understanding of how the galactic economy actually worked. The Banking Authority building was impressive from the outside, all gleaming metal and crystal towers that reached toward the sky. Inside, however, was a maze of corridors that seemed designed to confuse visitors. Jennifer spent an hour just finding the right office, following directions that led her in circles through departments that didn't seem to have any clear purpose. Bank Director Korthul met her in his office, a massive room filled with expensive artwork and furniture that looked uncomfortable. He was a Thraxian, tall and silver-skinned with 3 eyes arranged in a triangle on his face. His greeting was polite but distant, as if he was meeting with someone slightly beneath his notice. "Human auditor," he said, settling behind his desk. Very interesting. We have never had audit from Earth species before. Hope you understand our systems are very sophisticated, much more complex than primitive human banking. Jennifer smiled politely and opened her datapad. I'm sure they are. Could you walk me through the basic transaction processing flow? What Corthul described sounded reasonable on the surface. Customers initiated transactions through their local banks. Those transactions were routed through regional processing centers, then to sector hubs, and finally to the central authority for final clearance. Each step involved verification, security checks, and record keeping. The whole process takes how long? Jennifer asked. Very efficient. Most transactions complete within 15 to 20 standard days. Jennifer looked up from her notes. Days for electronic transfers? Very fast for galactic distances. Much faster than old system that took months. But we're talking about sending data, not physical goods. Why would it take more than a few minutes? Corthul's three eyes blinked in sequence. Very complicated process. Many security checks. Very thorough verification procedures. Cannot rush financial security. Jennifer spent the next week reviewing the actual transaction flows. What she discovered was a system that seemed designed to be as slow and expensive as possible. A simple transfer between two accounts on the same planet was routed through 7 different processing centers, each located on different worlds. Each center added its own fees, delays, and verification requirements. More troubling were the fees themselves. According to the official schedule, transaction fees ranged from 2 to 5% of the transferred amount, but Jennifer's analysis showed that actual fees averaged 12%, with additional charges appearing at every step of the process. These additional charges, she said to Corthul during their next meeting, processing fees, administrative costs, security verification charges, routing fees, handling fees. They're not mentioned in the official fee schedule. Ah, yes, operational overhead. Very normal. Costs of doing business across galaxy. But they're not listed anywhere. Customers don't know about them. Customers know money arrives. Exact fees not important as long as service provided. Jennifer pulled up her analysis on the office display screen. Over the past year, these unlisted fees have totaled 847 billion credits. That's more than the gross domestic product of most systems. Corthul's chair squeaked as he shifted uncomfortably. Operational costs very high. Maintaining galactic banking network very expensive. What exactly do these operational costs cover? The question hung in the air like a toxic gas leak. Corthul's three eyes darted around the room as if looking for escape routes. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. Cover many essential services. Very important services for Empire stability. What services specifically? Administrative functions. Regulatory compliance. System maintenance. Infrastructure development. Jennifer made notes on her datapad. Could I see the budgets for these services? I'd like to understand how the funds are allocated. If Corthul had been human, Jennifer would have said he was sweating. As it was, his silver skin had developed a distinctly grayish tinge, and he kept fidgeting with the decorations on his desk. Budgets very complicated. Classified information. Need special clearance to review financial details. I have special clearance. That's why I'm here. Need higher clearance. Much higher. Over the following days, Jennifer discovered that nobody seemed to have clearance high enough to review how the banking fees were actually used. The money went into something called the Imperial Development Fund, which distributed payments to various agencies and organizations throughout the Empire. But the fund's records were classified at a level that apparently didn't exist. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Jake Morrison was having similar experiences with the Imperial Fleet's supply chain. His assignment was supposed to be routine. Optimize cargo routing between fleet bases to reduce costs and improve delivery times. What he found was a logistics system that seemed designed by someone who had never heard of efficiency. The fleet operated hundreds of supply depots scattered across the galaxy. In theory, this provided redundancy and quick access to materials. In practice, it created a bureaucratic nightmare where simple requests were routed through multiple depots for no apparent reason. Jake's analysis of a typical supply request showed the problem clearly. A starbase in the Outer Rim needed spare parts for their communication array. The parts were available at a depot 2 days away. Instead of shipping directly, the request was routed to a depot 6 days away, which transferred it to another depot 8 days away, which finally shipped the parts back toward the original destination. Total delivery time, 23 days. This routing makes no sense, Jake said to Supply Director Quelvar during their weekly review meeting. Why not ship directly from the closest depot? Quelvar, a squat being with tentacles where his arms should be, waved dismissively. Each depot has specialization. Must follow proper channels. Cannot simply ship from any depot. But according to your inventory records, 17 different depots stock these same parts. Yes, but each depot has different processing procedures, different handling requirements, different administrative protocols. Jake pulled up a map showing the supply routing for the past month. Lines crisscrossed the galaxy in patterns that looked like abstract art. This shipment of medical supplies went to 4 different depots before reaching its destination. That's 6 weeks of travel time and storage fees at each stop. Very thorough system. Multiple verification points ensure quality control. But the supplies aren't being verified at each stop. They're just being transferred from one warehouse to another. Quelvar's tentacles writhed uncomfortably. Transfer fees help fund depot operations. Very important for maintaining supply network. Jake had spent enough time in military logistics to recognize waste when he saw it. But this wasn't just waste. It was systematic inefficiency that generated fees at every step. Each depot charged handling fees, storage fees, processing fees, and transfer fees. A shipment that should cost 50 credits in transportation was generating hundreds of credits in additional charges. What if we implemented direct routing? Jake asked. Ship from the closest depot that has the required items. Impossible. Would disrupt established relationships between depots. What relationships? Trading relationships, partnership agreements, long-term contracts for mutual support. Jake reviewed the depot management contracts and discovered another layer of the problem. Depot supervisors were paid bonuses based on the volume of transactions they processed. More transfers meant higher bonuses, regardless of whether the transfers served any useful purpose. The supply system wasn't just inefficient. It was designed to be inefficient because inefficiency was profitable for everyone except the people who actually needed the supplies. But the most revolutionary change was happening on Immigration Station Alpha 9, where civilian administrator Carol Brooks had done something unprecedented. She had made the immigration system work for immigrants instead of against them. Immigration processing in the Empire was traditionally a nightmare of forms, fees and delays that could stretch for years. Applicants were shuttled between different offices, required to obtain documentation that other offices wouldn't accept, and charged fees for services that were never actually provided. Carol's first day on the job had been an education in bureaucratic dysfunction. The waiting room was packed with beings from dozens of different species, all looking frustrated and exhausted. Some had been waiting for weeks just to submit their initial applications. How long does the average immigration case take? Carol asked her predecessor, a Veltar administrator named Kexthon who was eager to retire. 6 months to 2 years. Kexthon replied proudly, much faster than other stations. Very efficient operation. Carol looked at the crowd in the waiting room. What's the actual legal requirement for processing time? Legal requirement is 30 days for standard applications. But legal requirements very unrealistic. Cannot possibly meet such deadlines. Why not? The question seemed to confuse Kexthon. Many complications. Complex procedures. Thorough background checks. Cannot rush immigration security. Emperor Zarthak ruled the galaxy from his palace on Imperial Center, a massive complex that housed the government of 10,000 worlds. He had been born into power, trained from childhood to manage an empire that ran on traditions older than most civilizations. Change came slowly to such a vast system, and that was exactly how he preferred it. But something was happening in his empire that he didn't understand. Explain to me again about these humans, he said to intelligence. Director Sectar during their morning briefing. The Emperor's private office was the size of a small city, filled with holographic displays showing status reports from across the galaxy. Sectar, a tall being with skin like polished stone, consulted his datapad nervously. Very small species, Majesty. Only recently joined Empire. Approximately 50 million individuals scattered across 12 worlds. And they are causing problems how? Not causing problems exactly. More like solving problems. The Emperor's 4 eyes narrowed. Explain. They seem to believe that Imperial systems should function as designed. When assigned to administrative positions, they follow written procedures instead of traditional practices. Results have been disruptive. Sektar activated a holographic display showing economic data from across the empire. Banking transaction fees down 12%. Military supply costs reduced by 30%. Immigration processing times improved by 800%. Trade disputes down 60%. Those sound like good things. Yes, Majesty, but the improvements are causing secondary effects. Other species are beginning to demand similar efficiency from their own administrators. Traditional fee structures are being questioned. Established relationships between departments are being disrupted. Emperor Zarthak had ruled for 40 years by maintaining careful balance between the various factions that made up his government. Military leaders, trade guilds, banking consortiums, and bureaucratic departments all had their own interests and revenue streams. Stability came from ensuring that nobody's profits were threatened too dramatically. Are the humans demanding political concessions? Territory? Special trade privileges? No, Majesty. They simply perform their assigned duties as if the posted regulations were actual requirements rather than suggestions. The concept was so alien that the Emperor struggled to process it. What do they want? According to our analysis, they want their assignments to be completed successfully. Before Zarthak could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the palace. Emergency protocols activated automatically, sealing blast doors and activating defensive shields. The Emperor's personal guard rushed into the office, weapons ready. What's happening? Zarthak demanded. Communications Director Velnash appeared on the main holographic display. Majesty, we have reports of civil unrest on 17 worlds in the Outer Rim. Riots, protests, and demands for governmental reform. The Emperor felt ice forming in his stomach. Civil unrest meant military deployment, martial law, and the kind of widespread violence that could tear the Empire apart. What are their demands? They want human administrators. The ice in Zarthak's stomach turned to confusion. What? The riot started on Kepler 442b after news reports about human-managed mining operations. Safety improvements, reduced accidents, increased productivity. Other mining worlds began demanding similar oversight. When told no human administrators were available, protests began. Additional reports flooded in throughout the day. Agricultural worlds wanted human agricultural advisors after hearing about crop yield improvements. Trade stations were demanding human customs officials after learning about reduced processing times. Military bases were requesting human logistics coordinators after reports of supply chain improvements. They're not rioting against the government, reported Security Chief Thalmark. They're rioting for better government. Emperor Zarthak had dealt with rebellions, terrorist attacks, and political coups during his reign. But he had never faced a situation where citizens were demanding more effective administration. The concept was so unprecedented that the Imperial Crisis Management Protocols didn't even address it. How many humans are available for administrative positions? He asked. Approximately 12,000 have relevant qualifications, Sektar replied. But we have requests from over 400,000 positions across the Empire. The crisis reached its peak during the Outer Rim food shortage. Poor harvests and transportation problems had left millions of beings facing starvation across 30 worlds. The traditional Imperial response involved forming committees to study the problem, conducting impact assessments, and implementing aid programs that would deliver approximately 23% of needed supplies to affected populations after 6 months of bureaucratic processing. Colonel Amy Parker, the human military liaison assigned to Outer Rim Command, attended the emergency meeting where officials debated response protocols. She listened to 3 hours of discussion about proper channels, budgetary considerations, and jurisdictional authorities before finally standing up. People are starving, she said simply. We have food in military stockpiles and civilian warehouses. We have transport ships. Why don't we just deliver the food? General Korthval, the Outer Rim commander, looked at Amy as if she had suggested invading the Imperial Palace. Cannot simply commandeer supplies. Must follow proper requisition procedures. Must obtain authorization from appropriate authorities. How long do those procedures take? Standard emergency requisition processing takes 6 to 8 weeks if all documentation is properly filed. People will be dead in 6 to 8 weeks. Procedures exist for good reasons. Cannot bypass established protocols. Amy looked around the room at the assembled officials. Who has the authority to authorize emergency food distribution? Emergency Distribution Authority has jurisdiction over crisis supplies, General Korthval replied. Where are they? Committee is being formed. We'll meet next week to establish procedures for emergency response. Amy pulled out her personal communicator and contacted the human supply ships stationed in the region. Captain Rodriguez? This is Colonel Parker. I need you to contact every human merchant vessel in the Outer Rim. We have a humanitarian crisis. What do you need, Colonel? Food distribution to 30 worlds. I'm sending you the coordinates now. Set up direct delivery routes from the nearest supply points. Authorization codes. I'm authorizing it under emergency military authority. We'll sort out the paperwork later. General Korthval jumped to his feet. Cannot issue such orders. Not proper authority? Not following established procedures. Amy looked at him calmly. Then stop me. The general's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Technically, Amy had the authority to commandeer civilian resources during emergencies. The fact that nobody had ever actually used that authority didn't make it less legal. Within 48 hours, human cargo ships were delivering food directly to affected worlds. Instead of routing through multiple processing centers and distribution points, supplies went straight from storage facilities to local authorities. Instead of the usual 6-month timeline, hungry populations were receiving aid within days. The operation's success was impossible to ignore. Starvation stopped, civil unrest ended. Outer Rim worlds that had been on the verge of rebellion began sending messages of gratitude to the Imperial government. But the success came at a cost that shook the Empire's power structure. Amy's direct action had bypassed dozens of bureaucratic departments, eliminated thousands of processing fees, and proven that most of the governmental apparatus was unnecessary for actually governing. She made us look like fools, complained Administrative Director Felthor during an emergency session of the Imperial Council. She made us look like we don't know how to do our jobs. Trade Minister Velcon added. Because we don't, said Dr. Chris Lee, the human agricultural advisor who had been invited to address the council. Your job is supposed to be serving the citizens of the Empire. When did you last actually serve anyone besides yourselves? The question hit the assembled officials like a physical blow. For generations, Imperial service had been about managing systems, maintaining procedures, and collecting fees. The idea that government existed to serve citizens rather than employ bureaucrats was revolutionary. Government is complex operation, protested Treasury Secretary Gorthnall. Cannot simply solve problems directly, must consider long-term implications, budgetary constraints, political ramifications. The long-term implication of letting people starve is that they die, Chris replied. The budgetary constraint of emergency food distribution is that it costs less than revolution. The political ramification of effective government is that citizens support their leaders. Emperor Zarthak watched the debate from his throne, considering his options. He could suppress the humans, reassign them to positions where they couldn't cause disruption, and return to traditional imperial administration. But the riots had shown him something troubling. His citizens were beginning to expect competent government. The breaking point came when the Imperial Science Academy published Dr. Chris Lee's comprehensive analysis of governmental efficiency. The report, titled Actual Costs of Imperial Administration, documented exactly how much the Empire's bureaucratic systems cost compared to their actual benefits. General Tony Wright arrived at Imperial War College on a gray morning that seemed to match his mood. As the newly appointed human liaison to the War Planning Division, he had expected to find a sophisticated military operation managing the defense of 10,000 worlds. Instead, he found something that looked more like a very expensive think tank. The War Planning Division occupied an entire complex on Imperial Center, with thousands of staff members working on what appeared to be endless strategic assessments. Admiral Helen Davis, who had been assigned as Tony's deputy, joined him for their first briefing with Division Commander Supreme Marshal Kithoknor. The Supreme Marshal was an impressive figure, nearly 3 meters tall with ceremonial armor that probably cost more than a starship. His office was filled with tactical displays showing fleet positions, threat assessments, and defensive preparations that looked appropriately military. Human war planners, Kithoknor announced in a voice that suggested he was addressing children. Very interesting. Humans have much to learn about galactic warfare, very different from primitive planetary conflicts. Tony studied the tactical displays with professional interest. He had spent 30 years in Earth's military, rising through the ranks during humanity's expansion into space. The defensive arrangements looked sound at first glance, but something about the threat assessments bothered him. These barbarian fleets in the outer rim, Tony said, pointing to several red indicators on the main display. What's their technological level compared to Imperial forces? Very dangerous enemies, Kai Thoknor replied seriously. Heavily armed, aggressive tactics, require constant vigilance to prevent invasion. How many ships are we talking about? Intelligence estimates vary. Minimum several thousand vessels in primary attack formation. Tony looked at the fleet deployment charts. The Empire maintained massive defensive forces along the rim territories, with entire battle groups dedicated to monitoring barbarian movements. The budget allocation for rim defense was staggering, nearly 40% of the total military expenditure. When was the last direct engagement with these barbarian forces? Helen asked. Kai Thoknor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Direct engagement very rare. Barbarians use hit-and-run tactics, avoid major confrontations with Imperial fleets. But there have been some engagements? Of course. Many classified operations. Cannot discuss details due to security requirements. Over the following weeks, Tony and Helen requested access to after-action reports from these classified operations. What they found was a collection of vaguely worded documents that described successful defensive actions and strategic withdrawals, without providing any concrete details about enemy capabilities, casualties, or tactical outcomes. These reports don't contain any useful information, Helen observed during one of their analysis sessions. No ship specifications, no weapon assessments, no battle damage analyses. How do we plan defenses against an enemy we know nothing about? Tony was studying intelligence reports that dated back decades. According to this, the barbarian threat has been constant for over 60 years. Same fleet strength estimates, same territorial boundaries, same tactical assessments. Enemies that never change their capabilities or tactics for 60 years, and never actually attack anything important enough to document. Their breakthrough came when Tony requested direct sensor data from rim monitoring stations. As a general with appropriate security clearance, he had authority to review raw intelligence feeds that most war planners never saw. The sensor logs told a very different story than the threat assessments. Helen, Tony called across their shared office. You need to see this. The sensor data from the past year showed occasional contacts with unidentified vessels in rim territories. But the contacts were consistent with merchant traffic, exploration ships, and small-scale pirates rather than organized military fleets. The largest group detected contained 7 ships, all under 100 meters in length. Where are the barbarian battle fleets? Helen asked. Tony pulled up comparative data from Earth's deep space monitoring systems. Based on these sensor readings, the barbarian threat consists of approximately 200 small ships, scattered across 50 light-years of space. That's not a fleet. That's barely organized piracy. They spent the next month conducting a comprehensive review of rim defense operations. What they discovered was a military-industrial complex that had been fighting an imaginary war for decades. The barbarian fleets existed primarily in budget documents and threat assessments. Real barbarian activity was limited to small-scale raiding that could have been handled by local patrol squadrons. Instead, the Empire maintained battle groups that could have conquered entire sectors, all positioned to defend against enemies that existed mainly in reports. This is fraud, Helen said bluntly during their presentation to the War Planning Division staff. Military fraud on a galactic scale. Supreme Marshal Kithoknor's armor plates shifted nervously. Very serious accusations. Cannot question Imperial intelligence assessments without proper authority. I have proper authority, Tony replied, displaying his credentials on the main briefing screen. I also have sensor data that contradicts 60 years of threat assessments. Sensor data can be misleading. Must consider larger strategic picture. The larger strategic picture is that you're spending 40% of the Imperial military budget to defend against pirates with fishing boats. The room fell silent except for the hum of environmental systems. Staff officers who had built careers on barbarian threat analysis stared at displays showing the actual scope of rim activity. What are you suggesting? Asked Strategy Coordinator Velthane. I'm suggesting we resize our rim defenses to match the actual threat level, Tony said. Reduce battle group strength by 90%. Redeploy the excess forces to infrastructure protection and exploration support. Use the budget savings for education and economic development. The suggestion was so radical that several staff officers began hyperventilating. Strategy Coordinator Velthane's tentacles writhed in apparent distress. Cannot simply reduce military preparedness, Kithoknor protested. Barbarian threat could increase without warning. Then we'll monitor the situation and adjust our response accordingly. That's what competent militaries do. But what about current defense contracts, existing supply agreements, personnel assignments, logistics networks? Tony looked around the room at the assembled officers. What about them? Reduction in rim defense would eliminate thousands of positions. Entire departments would become unnecessary. Supply chains would be disrupted. Good, we'll reassign personnel to useful duties and redirect supplies to productive purposes. The concept of eliminating unnecessary military positions was apparently as revolutionary as the concept of following written regulations. The War Planning Division had grown into a massive bureaucracy that existed primarily to justify its own existence. Actual military planning was secondary to institutional survival, but Tony's report couldn't be suppressed or ignored. The sensor data was too clear, the budget implications too significant, and the strategic analysis too comprehensive. Within days, copies were circulating throughout. The Imperial Government Emperor Zarthak called an emergency session of the Defense Council to address what was being called the Barbarian Crisis. Tony and Helen were summoned to present their findings directly to the Emperor. The Imperial throne room was designed to intimidate. Massive columns stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadows, while holographic displays showed the might of Imperial fleets scattered across the galaxy. Emperor Zarthak sat on a throne that could have housed a small spacecraft, surrounded by advisors and officials who managed the Empire's military apparatus. General Wright, the Emperor said in a voice that echoed from the walls, "You claim that our rim defenses are unnecessary. I claim that our rim defenses are oversized for the actual threat, Your Majesty. We're maintaining battle fleets to fight an enemy that doesn't exist. The barbarian threat has been confirmed by our intelligence services for decades, and the barbarian threat has been inflated by intelligence services for decades. Actual barbarian activity is consistent with normal criminal piracy that could be handled by patrol squadrons." Defense Minister Kelvorth stepped forward. "Your Majesty, General Wright's analysis ignores the complex strategic situation in rim territories. Barbarian tactics rely on avoiding direct confrontation while building strength for eventual major assault." "When?" Tony asked bluntly. "When what? When is this eventual major assault supposed to happen? You've been predicting it for 60 years. Kelvorth's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. The question was simple, direct, and impossible to answer without admitting that the predictions were meaningless. Helen activated a holographic display showing comparative military expenditures. "Your Majesty, rim defense consumes more resources than education, infrastructure, and scientific research combined. We're spending more to defend against imaginary threats than we invest in actual imperial development." Emperor Zarthak studied the budget analysis in silence. The numbers were stark. Military spending had grown to consume nearly 70% of imperial revenues, while citizen services had been reduced to minimal levels. "What do you recommend?" he asked finally.